Our world is starving for simple, practical wisdom. I don't think we have to look very far today to recognize that, of just the need for good, practical wisdom in our world. I think back to 1991. Computers were just gaining their popularity in homes. A gentleman by the name of Dan Gukin wrote a book. It was entitled DOS for Dummies. Some of us actually remembered that book. Not long after that, there was another book that was published entitled Windows for Dummies. Now, today, there are more than 2,500 for Dummies books. Here's some examples. There is Bird Watching for Dummies. There's Dessert for Dummies, Investing for Dummies, Fishing for Dummies. That's just a few of the examples. In all, there are, like I said, 2,500 different titles out there. There are more than 200 million copies of these For Dummies books that are available. By the way, remember that book I told you about, Windows for Dummies? It sold 15 million copies. Makes it one of the best-selling computer books of all time. Now, that's the what. Here's the why. Why has this series been so successful? One reader put it this way. He said, I buy them because they take the intimidation out of the learning process. Whatever the subject matter, they spell it out to me in simple terms. They make the complex understandable so that even a regular guy like me can get it. This month we're going to look at one of those books in the Bible that takes the intimidation out of the learning process. The book of Proverbs spells out life in very simple terms. As we read each of the 31 chapters in this book, what we are going to find is ageless, priceless, practical wisdom. There aren't many complicated terms, and it just simply takes the effort to read it and to apply it. It has been said that Proverbs is the most practical book in the Bible. Now, those of us that like the book of James in the New Testament might want to discuss that some, but I think we can agree on this. Proverbs is the most practical book in the Old Testament. Let's just start on common ground, shall we? Here are a couple of examples of that practical wisdom in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 4. Sluggards do not plow in season. So at harvest time they look, but they find nothing. Sluggards is a word that is used in Scripture, in the book of Proverbs. It talks about a lazy person. So a lazy person doesn't plow when it's time to plow. So when it's time to gather the harvest, the lazy person has nothing to eat and is left to beg. That's just ageless, priceless, practical wisdom. Then Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with Him. God finds it disgusting when someone cheats another person. He is delighted when we treat each other fairly. Now, if we're going to talk about wisdom and we begin that discussion today, then I think it's going to be important for us to put a definition of wisdom on the table, to keep before us, that we can continually come back to as our guide, as our reference. When we're talking about wisdom, what exactly are we talking about? Sometime back when we were actually looking at the book of James, we put this definition on the table, and so I bring it back for us today. That when we talk about wisdom, wisdom is understanding the way life works and having the ability to navigate those difficult turns in life. Wisdom is having knowledge and knowing what to do with it. When we were talking about this definition, again, back with the book of James, I made this statement. I said it's like a guy having a PhD in psychology, but he may not have the practical wisdom and ability to be able to maintain a single friendship. Or as my mom would say, he may be smart, but he doesn't have walking around sense. Wisdom is the ability to take knowledge, to take experience, and to know what to do with it, to use that knowledge and that experience to help navigate those difficult turns in life. Now, when we look at the Bible, we don't read each book of the Bible the same way, particularly when we get to the Old Testament. If we're looking at the book of Exodus, Exodus is an account of a historical event, the Israelites leaving Egypt. It's also the account of God giving the law to Moses. And so you have this historical event and you have the law that deserves specific study. We will read the book of Exodus in a different way than we'll approach the book of Psalms, for instance. What we have in Psalms is we have the accounts, these writings of David, Asaph, Solomon, even Moses, where we really begin to see their heart. We just see them pouring their heart out to God. It may be in praise and thanksgiving. It may be confessing of sin. It may be pleading for guidance or deliverance in a time of turmoil. So we approach Exodus differently than we do Psalms. Then when we get to Proverbs, Proverbs we need to approach in a way that will help us understand Proverbs. There is a common thread that runs through Proverbs. It's going to be this plea to follow God's plan, obey His commandments, take this good practical wisdom that is put before us, and let's use it to help make good decisions. Now, the first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs, it really outlines an introduction to the book. And what we have a lot of word pictures, as I will call them. We have this word picture of this father that is giving advice, specifically here to his son, pleading with his son to listen to him and to follow that instruction. A good example of that is going to be Proverbs chapter 4. I'd like for us to turn there. We'll read the first 11 verses together. Proverbs chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, it's this plea to pursue wisdom. Listen, my son, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom. Get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this. Now, the New King James Version right here uses something that I like. It words that this way. Wisdom is the principal thing. Wisdom is the principal thing. Get wisdom. Though it may cost all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honor you. She will give you a garland to grace your head and present you with a glorious crown. Listen, my son, accept what I say, and the years of your life will be many. I instruct you in the way of wisdom and lead you along straight paths. Now, there's a great, just a practical picture of godly parents, of a godly father giving his children, passing along this godly wisdom. There's also a great picture and application to be found of children that are seeking that godly counsel and instruction from their parents. But I think there's an even bigger picture. It's the picture of God our Father seeking to guide us, to instruct us, to teach us, to lead us, and pleading with us to follow His counsel, to gain understanding and to gain wisdom. Let's back up one chapter to Proverbs chapter 3. One of my favorite passages is Proverbs chapter 3, beginning in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. So there's this plea to trust God. Don't lean on your own understanding. Trust God. Acknowledge Him. He's going to lead you along a straight path. Then let's go down just a few verses to Proverbs 3, verse 13. And it will talk about the way that God blesses us when we seek God's path and we seek that understanding and wisdom. Proverbs 3, verse 13. Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding. She is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed. I think about all these people that spend a lifetime trying to acquire wealth and to fatten their bottom line of their bank account. You know what Solomon would tell us in Proverbs? Wisdom is better. I think about all of these people that spend such a effort in their lifetime of gaining power and prestige, fame, fortune, and achievement. You know what the wise man would say in Proverbs? Wisdom is better. It is important for us to seek that wisdom, that understanding. The proverb writer would say, nothing we desire can compare with wisdom, with God's wisdom. Now, Proverbs gives us advice, good, practical, ageless, priceless advice on how to be good parents, and wise children. It helps us to be better business owners and employees. How to be a good friend and how to search for good friendships. This pursuit, when we start talking about seeking wisdom, though, also will lead us down a path toward a pursuit of good morals and ethics. Proverbs chapter 2, beginning in verse 11, the Bible tells us, discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from men whose words are perverse, who have left the straight paths to walk in dark ways. So if we follow God's plan and we seek wisdom God's way, it'll help us to stay in the light, not following those dark paths. Proverbs will also remind us that, man, this seeking wisdom and seeking this understanding, this is a great investment in the future. Proverbs 24, verse 14 says, know that wisdom is like honey for you. If you find it, there is a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. Man, don't you love, I mean, we've already begun to see this, the word pictures, that imagery that is used in Proverbs to help us just get this really, it is priceless, it is ageless, it is practical wisdom at its finest. And Solomon the writer here is helping us to understand that as we go through Proverbs. So, one other thing I want us to look at this morning, that if we're going to put wisdom on this end, then what goes on the other end? If this is wisdom, what is the opposite? Well, Proverbs tells us that. Proverbs will call an unwise person a fool. An unwise person will make a foolish decision. The actions of an unwise person will be called folly. This unwise person, it may lack knowledge, but it may be that they have that knowledge and they just choose to ignore that knowledge, choose to ignore God's wisdom. When we start talking about this wise versus foolish in Proverbs, there's a lot of times that Proverbs will just point that out in a way of contrast. I want us to look at a couple of those, beginning in Proverbs 12, verse 15. The way of fools seem right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Proverbs 14, verse 16. The wise fear the Lord and shun evil, but a fool is hot-headed yet feels secure. Proverbs 29:11. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. All right, so if an unwise person is a fool and he makes foolish decisions and those actions are folly, let's get a glimpse of how Proverbs talks about the folly of the unwise person. Look at just a couple of verses as we close. We're going to begin in Proverbs chapter 5, verse 23. For lack of discipline, they will die, led astray by their own great folly. Proverbs 12, verse 23. The prudent keep their knowledge to themselves, but a fool's heart blurts out folly. Proverbs 15, verse 14. The discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of a fool feeds on folly. And then Proverbs 16:22. Prudence is a fountain of life to the prudent, but folly brings punishment to fools. Now, if we're going to look at the most practical book in the Old Testament, we agreed on that, right? If we're going to look at the most practical book in the Old Testament, then I think it's going to be important for us to leave with several let's get practical points. And I've got 3 of those that I'd like for us to look at this morning. And the first one is going to be this. Let's read through the book of Proverbs. In fact, let's read 1 chapter a day. Well, how do we know which chapter to read? Look on your calendar. I know some of you have been able to get started in this already. Some of you are hearing this for the first time and you're sitting here going, oh, I'm behind. No, you're not. You're fine. You're fine. But look at the date on today's calendar. Today is July 5th, and so read Proverbs chapter 5. And for the next 31 days, just look at what the date is on the calendar and read that chapter in the book of Proverbs. Let's read through that together. Again, what are we looking at? We are looking at ageless, priceless, practical wisdom. All right, second thing is this, let's begin the journey. Where do we start? Well, Proverbs tells us that. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So when we talk about this knowledge, when we talk about this wisdom, let's be clear about this. We're talking about getting to know God better. We're talking about getting to know God's way, God's will, God's plan for us better. And the desire is that we would seek that plan. But friends, we're not talking about earthly wisdom. We're talking about wisdom that comes from God. And so it's the fear of the Lord that's the very beginning step. What does that mean? It means that we recognize who God is. It is an awe. It is a respect of His greatness, of His goodness, and the awesomeness of the plan that He has laid before us. So that's why the proverb writer would say that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So we want to read a chapter a day. We want to begin the journey. And then we want to recognize our folly. We need to, if we're going to read through the book of Proverbs, if we're going to read this chapter a day, then we need to recognize where we need to work. We need to recognize our tendency toward unwise, toward foolish decisions. We don't want to walk in that way of folly. And so, let me give you a couple of examples if I could. Because the book of wisdom here is going to point out ways that we struggle. We want to identify those, we want to work on them. Here we go. Do you lose your temper easily? Read the book of Proverbs. Do you try to take shortcuts in your business dealings? Listen to the book of Proverbs. Do you have problems in friendships and in relationships? Read the book of Proverbs. Do you like to use money in a way that ends up being a bad choice and bad decisions? Well, listen to the book of Proverbs. Do you struggle with discipline in your life? Read the book of Proverbs. Maybe you stretch the truth. Maybe pride is your issue. Listen to the book of Proverbs. If we're going to read it, then we need to listen to it. We need to study it. We need to apply it. We want to identify our struggles and then work from there. So what are our 3 points? We want to read a chapter a day. We need to begin the journey understanding this journey begins with God. We walk the path of God, and ultimately it leads us to God. And then as we read, we want to recognize our folly. So here's my prayer, here's my hope for us, that we'll begin this journey together. Remember, today we're reading Proverbs chapter 5. So we want to go through and we want to grow in this together. We want to see if we can be a wiser people, if we can seek this path toward wisdom and understanding, a path that ultimately leads us to God and to His plan for our lives.